everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Happy Thanksgiving to you all. I want to make sure that you understand that because yesterday was Black Friday, today is Black Sabbath. So in honor of our friend Rabbi Ozzy Osbourne, we'll be eating chicken this afternoon. Never mind. A couple of welcome. It's good to see you. If you were at the mall yesterday, it was a marvelous experience. Actually, it wasn't as crowded as in past years. They say that most people are now shopping online. So they're $1 billion, they say, $1 billion or $1 trillion online before the holiday began. And then the stories, do you see these people that lined up? The people that lined up starting like Tuesday, Wednesday afternoon, they line up at Best Buy. And the stories in the paper, the ladies, I've been doing this for 17 years, it's my custom now. I mean, you think we Jews are strange. I mean, good God. People that line up because you can get a 50-inch television for $189. The crazy thing is there's still nothing on. I mean, Netflix, right? But it's crazy. Anyway, it was lovely to see America out there spending money again. Following our conversation here, we'll go into the sanctuary. There's no bar mitzvah. There's a cute little baby naming today, and then lunch, of course, for everyone. Is there Parsha study? Where's Judy? Is there a Parsha study today? Okay, there'll be Parsha study today. Monday night, tomorrow night, I'm going to give you the day off. Monday night, we continue in our series on politics in America, and our guests Monday night will be three of the founders of the Republican Jewish Coalition. And these are three gentlemen who have been worked very hard to gather up a Republican Jewish community. And they're going to be talking about, the official title is American Conservatism, the Republican Party in the Age of Trump. We like to call it the elephants in the room, right? So, but three very important speakers, Bruce Balofsky and Larry Greenfield and Arnold Steinberg are important visionaries about American life. And they want to talk about where the Republican Party is post-Trump, with Trump, without Trump. Come in, find some room. And an American conservative vision of the country. So please come Monday night to enjoy that. And then on Wednesday night, we continue with College of Jewish Studies. Our theme this year is a survey of Jewish history. And this week, we're going to begin the next section, which is a discussion of the rabbinic period. So what is the Talmud? What is the Mishnah? What is the Midrash? Who are the rabbis? What is this whole business of rabbinic Judaism? How does it differ from biblical Judaism? We'll discuss that in an overview on Wednesday night. Everyone is invited. There are brownies and cookies. On Thursday night, we partner with Americans for Peace Now for the annual Bubis Lecture. And our guest will be Amir Tivon, who is the Haaretz correspondent in Washington. So he writes about Washington and American politics for Israel's leading intellectual newspaper. If you want to get a sense of how Israel sees America, how America sees Israel, what the connection is, where the strains are these days, this is the guy who will come and tell us about that. So that's Thursday night. It's all free. You know, you're welcome to come and enjoy this. And then Friday night, we daven together. I think it's just little kids. In 2 weeks, which is the 15th and 16th of December, we'll celebrate and commemorate Rabbi Schulweiss's yahrzeit, and our guests that weekend will be Rabbi Yitz and Blue Greenberg. Rabbi Greenberg is the greatest living Jewish philosopher right now, remarkable, deep, and poetic thinker, and he'll be our guest. He's just finished a great 2-volume theology of post-Holocaust Judaism called The Triumph of Life, and he'll be here to discuss with us his vision of Jewish life after the Holocaust. A wonderful, wonderful teacher. And Blue is considered the mother of Orthodox feminism, and she'll be discussing that with us as well. So Friday night, there'll be a program. Shabbos morning, he'll join us for Torah study. During services, he'll speak. Blue will be speaking to the Neshama Minyan that morning, and then together they'll do a lecture right after lunch. And then Saturday night, we'll gather again for a post-Shabbos conversation. So please put that on your calendar and join us. Those are very special moments. So Monday night with the elephants, Wednesday night with the rabbis, Thursday night with the Israelis, and then next week with the Greenbergs. You got that? All right, there you go. Good. All right. That's right? You can just stay. Yeah, I mean, we serve good food. I don't know why. I hope you all enjoyed the Thanksgiving holiday. I hope it was pleasant for you. It was good? Good. This morning we're going to do something slightly different than our usual. So for those who are visiting, welcome. This is not what we usually do. Come in, please make yourself at home. But over the weekend, we received news that Professor Rabbi Neil Gilman passed away. Rabbi Gilman was... No, not Gelman. Gelman. No, he's fine. God doesn't want him. I mean, no. He'll live forever because the Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't want to deal with him. No, Rabbi Gilman lives in New York, and Rabbi Gilman was one of the, or if not the principal personality that shaped both Rabbi Farkas and me. He was our theology professor at JTS. So we wanted to spend some time this morning talking about Neil, our friend, and introducing him to you if you haven't met him. He's spoken here at VBS a number of times and taught us. A very, very wonderful theologian. But without we'd spend a few minutes talking about him, and I thought I'd do that derech the Torah, by way of the Torah, because this morning there's a line in there that really befits our friend Neil. So the story, is it's Vayetze. If you have the Chumash in front of you, it's on 166. If you don't, it's okay. We'll just share. Last week, Jacob steals the birthright and the blessing from his brother, and his brother Esav promises to kill him. So Jacob leaves town. He goes back to the old country. He goes quickly. And the story commences this week with his journey. This is really the journey of the hero. It's the journey of the development of a soul. Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva. Now the famous joke about that is that how do you know that wearing a sweater is according to the Torah? And the answer says, Jacob left Beersheba. You think his mother let him leave without a sweater on? Right? But she did, actually. That's actually the kunz of the story. Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheba, he left. Leaving home is part of the tradition of this family. This is what his grandfather did too, right? Leaving home and going out into the world to discover who you are and who is the God you worship is the family pattern. That's what you do. So he left home and he came to a certain place by Yifka b'makom, and he stopped there for the night. The sun had set, and taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. Now, I was a kid I went to Boy Scout camp once. And in Boy Scout camp, they teach you if you don't bring a pillow, and nobody ever brings a pillow on a camp out, what do you use for a pillow? No, you don't use a rock. Yeah, you're sleeping on your sleeping bag. Come on. A towel, a sweater, a sweatshirt, your knapsack, if you're really lucky, your girlfriend, right? You find something sweet and soft to put your camping on. What kind of guy uses a rock for a pillow? No, think about this. What is it trying to tell you? He used a stone for a pillow. It means he left home with nothing. He ran out of the house with no provisions, no preparation, nothing. A man who uses a stone as a pillow is a man who has left home naked, basically. He's a hard-headed man, right, hard-headed Jews. And he goes out into the world with nothing. Now, part of this is, you understand who Jacob was. The Torah identifies him last week as Yoshevo Halim. He's the guy who stays home. He's what we call a homebody. He's a mama's boy. This is the first night he's ever slept away from home. It's the first night he's ever been outside the protective boundaries of the camp. This is the first time he hasn't had mama sleeping next door. It really is a sense of the aloneness of the moment. Okay? And in that aloneness, he has a dream. He has a dream. And it says, Sulam Mutzav Arza. Now, it's written here, stairway, because H.L. Ginsburg, who translated the Torah for the JPS people, that's our translation, was a big fan of Led Zeppelin. And having a stairway to heaven, he just had to find a way to put stairway to heaven into the Bible. Right? And he's climbing. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you're in the wrong generation. I'm just very sorry. But the word sulam doesn't mean stairway. It means ladder. there was this ladder. He dreams of a ladder. So he has this image of the connection between heaven and earth, and angels going up and down on the ladder, and God standing. Now here's what, you'd imagine if you saw a ladder or a stairway reaching to heaven, where would God be? At the top, but that's not where God is. That's what's so interesting. It says, and God was standing beside him. He's at the bottom. The stairway goes to heaven, but he sees, I don't know what he sees, but he sees God standing beside him. Standing beside him. And God says, I'm the Lord your God of Abraham, God of Isaac. The ground I'm assigning you is holy. Is yours. Your descendants will be as the offspring. I'll be with you and I'll protect you. Look at page 167, I'll come back to Rabbi Gilman in a minute. Verse 16. Jacob awoke, Vayikatz Yaakov mishnato. He woke up from his sleep. Vayomer. Here's the line I wanted to get to. It's a very interesting line, strange line. Achen yesh Adonai makom hazeh v'anochi lo yadati. God is in this place and I didn't know it. God is in this place and I didn't know it. Now, that's the first. It's an interesting, what does it mean God is in this place and I didn't know it? Right? Achen, we'll come back to that in a minute. That's one of the problems with the verse. Jacob hasn't spoken of God since the beginning of the story, right? He's only spoken of himself. It's only been about his own stuff. For the first time, the young man wakes up, he's far away from home, and he's beginning to get a sense of the universe that he lives in, the world that he lives in. And he's beginning to understand that the world that he lives in has boundaries far beyond what his imagination allowed him before. Suddenly, the world's bigger than he thought it was. And there are characters in this world, patterns in this world that he didn't think about. Here's the interesting, if you look at the Hebrew, if you possibly can read Hebrew, it's the second paragraph on page 167, beginning with verse 16. Vayikatz Yaakov mishnato vayomer. He wakes up from his sleep and he says, the first word of the sentence is achen. It's a weird word. Achen? What's achen? Here it translates it as surely. I don't know, maybe it should be surely with an I, like surely. No, surely, achen, I think I would do achen, I would say achen means wow. It's like, whoa, right? Woo! Something like that. That's how I would try, but I don't know how you write that. Yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh. God is in this place, right? And then the next set, if you wanted to say, I didn't know that, you would say, v'lo yadati. And I didn't know that. Lo yadati is enough. In the middle of the sentence is the word va'anochi. Va'anochi. Now, anochi is the long version of the word ani, which means me, right? Me. Anochi. Anochi is also the first word of the Ten Commandments. Anochi Adonai Elohecha, right? It means I with a big capital I. It's a big capital I. Yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh va'anochi lo yadati. God's in this place, and read it this way. God's in this place, and I didn't know myself. I didn't know my I. I don't know who I am. I don't know where I am. This is the first line that every college freshman says the first night you sleep alone in the dormitory. This is the first night every young bride and groom says to themselves the night of their honeymoon. This is the first night, this is the first thing you say the first night you brought the baby home from the hospital and the baby was sleeping in the bassinet at the end of the bed. And you say to yourself, there's God, there's awesomeness in this world, and I haven't got any idea who I am now. I have no idea where I am, who I am, what I am, where I am in the world. This is the beginning of Jacob's journey because it's the beginning of his awakening as a human being. Who am I? Who am I in this world? What am I in this world? What am I expected to become in this world? What is my potential in this world? Suddenly, he wakes up and the boundaries of his existence are much bigger than they've ever been before. Now, let me stop for a moment and tell you something about our teacher, our friend Neil, who passed away. So Rabbi Neil Gilman was a professor of theology at Jewish Theological Seminary. He was born and raised in Montreal, Canada, attended McGill University, which is the most prestigious university in Canada, studied philosophy. Then he came to become a rabbi at JTS, same school we went to. and continued to study across the street at Columbia University in their very, very fine philosophy department, and wrote his PhD thesis on a French existentialist named Gabriel Marcel. And then he came to teach at JTS. Now, Rabbi Farkas and I have different experiences of the man. Mine are authentic, but his are, a little later. So,
you know what they say about a fine scotch?
Yeah, what's that? It gets better,
It
yeah.
gets better
Right, it's true. He got better as he aged. But so when I got to JTS, I started rabbinical school in 1975, but I did 2 years here and a year in Israel, and I got to JTS in New York in 1977, and 1978. And Neil was the dean of the school. And I was having a very hard time with school because I was young and it was interesting times to be in New York. And I went in to complain to him one day about something, because that was his job. It was every rabbinical student lined up and went to complain about something. And I was whining on about some class I didn't want to take. And at one point he stopped me and he said, "What are you doing Friday night?" And I said, "I don't know, we're making Shabbos, Nina and me." He said, "Come to our house." And it was the first professor who invited me. He was the first professor who actually saw me. I was invisible at the school, and he invited Nina. So Nina and I walked down. He had a beautiful apartment on West End Avenue. Neil was married to Sarah, has 2 daughters. Abby is a professor of German literature, right?
Yeah,
At Penn. One's a doctor and one's a professor. Smart kids. And we had dinner with this professor. And we became very close. We spent a lot of time in his home with his family. When Neil turned 50, which must have been about 1980, 3 things happened to him at the same time, and this is the Anochi lo yadati moment. He turned 50, his father died, and he was turned down for tenure. In the academic world, that's really not a good thing. It means that he had been writing books, but they didn't see the books that he'd been writing as sufficiently scholarly to earn a professorship. And so they would keep him at the level of associate or assistant professor for the rest of his career, but he wouldn't be assigned a professorship. And this was a terrible insult, hi there, there's music in the air. This was a terrible difficulty for him. At JTS, yeah. And he went into a really deep depression, like a midlife depression. The combination of turning 50, losing your dad, and losing your academic sort of future, as it were, or at least the image that you had of what you ought to be. He went into a very deep depression, and a group of us who loved him very much and appreciated him, we went over to go see him, went to his house, and we were sitting with him, and we were talking with him, and at a certain point we started talking about his class. Now, he taught theology the way everything at Jewish Theological Seminary was taught. The Jewish Theological Seminary believed that you're nobody until you're dead 300 years. No, I'm not kidding. So they practiced what they called quotational Judaism, which was you took a class in philosophy and it was like they give you a topic, let's say, who wrote the Torah? According to Maimonides, Halevi, the Kuzan, I mean, all 100 different philosophers, right? Why do bad things happen to good people? According to whom? No one ever asked you your opinion, or anyone living's opinion. It was always according to which scholar. It was always about the text you read. And at a certain point in the conversation, somebody said to Neil, "You know, I have a friend who's studying to be a Christian pastor at Union Theological, which is across the street. And at Union, they have a very different way of teaching theology. They actually ask the students to think about what they believe." And something lit up in Neil's eyes, because he came into class that next week. He came to class on that Monday, and he said to the class, I wasn't in the class, but I came to that class because he asked me to come. So I was sitting in the class, and everyone's got their books and their notes laid out in front of them on these big tables, and he said, put it all away, take out one piece of paper, and write down who you think wrote the Torah. So the student's not used to this, according to whom, right? According to Maimonides, according to Crescus, according to Rashi, according to Heschel, according to Kaplan, according to, no. He says, I don't want any according tos. I want to know who you think wrote the Torah. I said, what do you mean, what we think? Who are we? We're nobody, you know? And he said, that's the point. That's the problem. We're nobody. That's what we've succeeded in teaching you, that you're nobody. So put away all the notes, put away all the books. For this assignment, you're not permitted to quote anybody. I want to know who you think wrote the Torah. He closed his notes and walked out of the room. That's it. That was the whole class. So this class of 20 rabbinical students is sitting looking like, is he kidding? Did he go out of his mind? Is he nuts? What's wrong with this man? And so people went to his office and said, Neil, like, what did you really mean? Like, is this a trap? Are we going to be asked, like, They said, no, I want to know what you think. And that became the class. He came back in, we read our statements, we critiqued each other's statements, we grouped them into different, then he came and said, okay, now take out a piece of paper, and now we got used to it. He said, tell me what you say to a family that's just had a tragedy. Why bad things happen to good people? According to nobody except you. And this became his teaching philosophy. Then he did two more things which were quite remarkable. He took this philosophy, he did it here, by the way. He went all over the country giving workshops, and he would ask Jewish people to do the same thing. We'd sit in a circle in a workshop. Everybody expected this professor to give us a lecture on, 10 reasons why. He said, no, take out a piece of paper and tell me what you think God is. What would you say to your kid who asks you, what is God? Who is God? Where is God? Let's talk about your theology. And he led theology workshops all over, and he's done this for the rest of his career. He did this for 30 years. And he would lead, because he said, you have wisdom. You're no dumber than the people who lived, 300 years ago. They're useful to us because they've offered us ways of thinking, but that doesn't disqualify this generation from asking its own deep theological questions. And then the next move that he made was he stopped writing academic theology because he realized he wasn't going to get tenure anyway. So there was no reason to write what professors usually write, and apologies to any of you who are professors here, but you usually write papers that only other professors can read, right? And if you ever open an academic journal or a PhD dissertation, right? It's impossible to read because it's written for other professionals. But Neil started writing what we call popular theology. He started writing theology for people. He started asking these questions for us. And he published several important books. Rabbi Farkas has brought them for show and tell today. And we'll talk about them. And I want to just explain one idea, and then I'm going to ask my colleague to help us understand a little bit more about it. So Neil asked himself this very important question. When we say anything about God, what are we really saying? Here's a book that's all about God, right? Except if we had defined at the outset that God is beyond human comprehension, God is beyond the capacity of human language to describe, what are you saying when you talk about God? So you have to acknowledge from the very beginning that all of the words we use about God are metaphorical. They're symbolic words. They're not literally words. Now, sometimes when we get frightened, when religious communities get frightened, they assert themselves and they say, no, the language is literally true. But that can't be, because you acknowledge from the beginning that you're talking about a reality which is beyond your comprehension. What you're doing is talking in symbolic language. And when you put together symbolic language, you arrive at, here's going to be a word that's going to scare you. You arrive at an idea that theology, that is religion, is a thing called myth. Now, we use the word myth in a number of different ways. One way that we colloquially use the word myth is to say it's a fairy tale, it's not true, it's a lie. Okay? If you say, it's a, what?
A noble
lie.
lie.
Well, it can be a noble lie, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a lie. It's the, come in. It's the myth that cholesterol will kill you, something like that. The myth that. We use the word myth to describe something that we acknowledge is not true. But in social science, the word myth is used to mean something much deeper than that. The word myth is used to describe an idea that organizes the way we see the world. So let me give a simple little example. We go to the park, and there in the park we see a group of individuals, some adults and some children, and they're behaving in a very peculiar way. And we say to ourselves, that's a family. That's a family. Now that word family, right? what does that word really describe? What we're seeing is a group of people behaving in a certain way. We see adults being affectionate to children. We see children responding in a certain way to adults. We see people sharing food or sharing experiences together. And we say, that's a family, right? What we're describing is a pattern of behavior. And we assign to it the word family. Now, family as a thing doesn't exist, right? Book exists, room exists, banister exists. Family, what is family? Family is a word we use to describe a certain kind of network of relationships that gathers people together, and it helps us understand why people behave in certain rather strange ways. We call that family. Some of you were with your family on Thanksgiving and you're still hurting from it, right? But there's a certain quality of relationship, a certain quality of interaction that occurs when we talk about family. Now, if I have the word family, now when I walk the world and I see people behaving in that way, I can use that word to organize my experience of how people behave in that way. Family, in that way, is that kind of a word. Neil used the phrase, he used the metaphor of spectacles. It's like you put on your glasses and now I can see something that I couldn't see before. I can see the network of relationship among these individuals, and I realize that they are a family, you see? We do this all the time. We form patterns of our experiences and assign words to them so that they explain to us what's going on. And that word is used as it both describes what's going on, but it allows us to see things that we wouldn't ordinarily have seen otherwise. Because we have the word family, we can detect certain kinds of patterns of relationship among grown-ups and children, for example. And then sometimes when things go awry, we say, well, that's a bad family. That's a family that has issues, right? A dysfunctional family. So this is what he means by the word myth. Now, suppose you take that idea and you apply it back to religion, and you use the word God in the same way. The word God doesn't refer to a thing. It organizes our way of looking at the entire world. It organizes our way of what we can expect of the world. It organizes the way of what we can expect of ourselves when we become part of that world. In the same way that I have a certain sense of who I am in my family, I have a certain sense of who I am in my world when I use the word God in that way. And that's going to be the direction that he's going to take us as he talks about religion. So let me introduce my colleague, Rabbi Farkas. I brought you up to 1985, 83
You
actually.
started the seminary what year?
I started in 75, but I got to JTS in 78. Yeah.
I was born in 79.
Yeah. That's very depressing. That's very, very depressing.
I arrived at JTS in 2002, so another generation has gone by, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And I arrived at the seminary, and at the time you could get sort of a master's degree in addition to your seminary work. And they asked me, well, what field do you want to go into? Do you want to go into education? Do you want to learn Talmud? Do you want to learn Midrash? Do you want to learn Bible? And I said, no, I want to learn philosophy. My background's in philosophy. I wanted to learn philosophy. So I said, okay, so you have to go meet, if you want to learn philosophy, the first person you have to meet is Professor Gilman. And you go up to the 6th floor in the tower, and you know that you knew he was in his office from the moment the elevator door opened, because office is around the corner. It wasn't right there in the elevator lobby. Because he was an avid pipe smoker, and the pipe smoke and scent of the pipe would just take up the entire corridor, and you knew that the professor was in, because the Reach Nichoach was filling the Mishkan, so to speak.
Just incidentally, so that you get the picture of this. So this was. Had they built the building yet? Had they fixed the building?
Yeah, I started.
So when I was there, it was still this old decrepit building, and you walked down the hallway, but you had a sense of this. This is the hallway where Rabbi Gilman, Neil, had Heschel's office. and right across the hallway was Kaplan's office. So this, in the previous generation, the generation before mine, this was ground zero for the great theologian. And they gave Neil Heschel's office because Heschel was a cigar smoker. So before he even moved in, the place reeked of tobacco. And they gave it to him because he figured it wouldn't matter anyway, right?
It was also important to Neil that he sat at Heschel's desk. I mean, that was, he didn't change the desk at all.
No.
So that was a very important thing. So I go into the office, which was small. It's a New York office, you know, it's not fairly large, and it's overly stuffed with books and articles and all sorts of. Neil is wearing a cardigan with patches on the elbows and smoking his pipe. And he comes down, he's a very high-pitched, and he's like, I got to imitate it. But you, like that was how the conversation began. I began telling about myself, and he spent probably the first 20 minutes wanting to know about my background, my history, my personhood, who I knew, all of that before we even got into a single conversation about theology. And then he takes out a passage from Job, because he decided to, why should we start easy? And he talks about Job's suffering, and he says, well, what do you do with this? Is God, the immediate theological question of God and suffering. And from there we had a very long conversation. Just from that one interaction, it's my first day, it was like the day before the term began in rabbinical school, just from that one interaction, which must have been a couple of hours, I learned two very important things. One, I'll never be a big smoker. That is very important, but I'll put up with it. Most importantly is before you get to theology, you have to get to connection and relationship. And that what's most important is that every theology is embedded in a society, is embedded in a myth, and societies need myth. And that before you can talk about God, you have to talk about people. And that that was probably one of his greatest gifts. So just to pick up though, so I worked with him. I was one of his, like Rabbi Feinstein, I was one of his teacher's assistants while the time that I was in rabbinical school. He had just finished a book about death and ruminating on death. The first 5 chapters of which were what Eddie would say is quotational Judaism. What does one person say? What does another person say? And at the very end, the last chapter, he's like, I'm going to throw all that out. I'm going to tell you what I believe now. And so that his reflections on death and why death is important, and believing in the death of death itself, this idea of what's called eschatology, this going on beyond the horizon of experience and having a faith in he even believed in faith in bodily resurrection in the time to come and these kinds of things, but why it was important for him to believe in that. And then he was beginning to recollect these stories and essays over time, and he was beginning to sort of anthologize. So I brought a couple of his anthologies. One of the things that I want to point out, if I remember exactly where it is what we talk about when he takes the word metaphor, right? The metaphor is something that comes to stand in sort of concert with something else. Right? It's sort of like you use one thing to describe another thing, but those two things aren't actually identical. In fact, the most powerful metaphors are the ones where they're not identical at all. In fact, they may even be antonyms to each other, but they come to describe each other in a profound way. It gives you a new understanding of the world. And so what he says is that metaphors are the way that we understand everything. His most profound statement to me was, it's not about saying that God or religion is only a metaphor. It is not only a metaphor, because that actually sort of pushes down the idea of what a metaphor could be. It's that it's not merely a metaphor, it is nothing less than a metaphor. That's what he would say. Nothing less than a metaphor, which actually elevates what the idea of what metaphor is. Now, what do I mean by that? What does he mean by that? Essentially is that everything that we understand about the world, we speak of in metaphorical or mythic terms. And the question is, not whether or not you're speaking in metaphor, but which metaphor you choose to use to orient yourself to life. And Eddie was talking about a family. Rabbi Gilman loved to talk about, he loved basketball. So he loved to talking about the passing game. There's no such thing as a passing game, especially if you're a Laker fan. But the truth is that a passing game comes to explain a pattern of experience over a period of time of which then you can make a statement about that experience. He would talk about the ego, that there's no such thing as an ego. But the idea of ego comes to explain a particular facet of who we are and what we need as human beings. He would talk about the way, in terms of science, he would talk about a quark, and that a quark was a particular experience that happens out in the nether regions of space, but no one's ever actually seen it or experienced it directly. It's a word that comes to explain a pattern of gravitational forces light years away from now. So what if we were then to explain what it meant to live in a world where we just acknowledge that everything that we talk about has to do with signs, symbols, and metaphors? For a long time, for a very long time, he taught me that we tried, and the project of Judaism in the 20th century, especially after the Holocaust, was to demythologize Judaism, to take the myth out. Rabbi Schulweis was excellent at this. You take the myth out of who wrote the Torah, you take the myth out of the Exodus, you take it out, you take the magic and myth out of Judaism, and what you're left with, hopefully, is a core set of common Jewish values that we can then re-sanctify the world through our understanding of morality. What Gilman did, which was sort of the next iteration after Schulweis's sort of groundbreaking work, was he said, I want to re-mythologize Judaism. I want to re-mythologize the world by realizing that we never gave up the myth in the first place. The myth just comes to change as you go. You with me? Do you understand what I'm saying? So I know it's very abstract. So, like, if we can no longer believe that God wrote the Torah word for word from Mount Sinai to Moses, and then Moses gave it to the people written on tablets, written down, and we don't believe that that happened literally, so we have two choices. One is to excise it altogether, and to say what's most important are the values of loving your neighbor as yourself, or we can also then re-mythologize it to say that that is a metaphor for the experience of how we understand the universe. That God comes to us not in literal terms, but in metaphoric terms. And in order to do that, you have to, what he would call, become naive a second time. You grow up in the world and you begin in the world of naivete. Right? My kids are young. Many of them are still, most of them are very naive. And I'm happy about that, actually. I like to keep my kids young because the world is very complex and want them to love their child. But then there comes a point in your life where you realize maybe your dad or mom aren't so perfect. Or maybe the world you live in isn't so great. It's not all Care Bears and rainbows and clouds and things, and it's a little bit broken. And then you end up becoming this like sort of rebel without a cause, so to speak, because your myth has been broken about the world. And so then what Gilman wants to say is, okay, you've gone on that long journey, now come home and say it's okay to re-mythologize the world in which we live. Because the myth was always there, and we just have to shift the myth. And that you can't will someone to believe in God. You can't actually do that. But what you can do is set up a situation in which you can suspend your disbelief.
So let's trace. I want to go back over that again, because that's the key move.
Right.
And let me use a really bad example. Okay, a really bad example. Little kids believe in Santa Claus. Little kids believe in the Tooth Fairy. Okay, all little kids believe in the Tooth Fairy, and many little kids believe in Santa Claus. Okay, I was at the mall yesterday, and my God, there he was. Right. And then somewhere around a kid's, I don't know, 5th, 6th, 7th, 10th, 21st birthday, child discovers it's not the tooth fairy who puts the quarter under my pillow, it's mom and dad. And there is no Santa, no Virginia, there is no Santa Claus. And there's every adolescent goes through this moment of demythologizing, right? How many times have we sat with bar mitzvah kids who told their moms and dads on the eve of their bar mitzvah, I don't believe in God. And the mother freaks out and calls the rabbi and schleps the kid over to the shul late Friday afternoon before the bar mitzvah, like, give him back God, rabbi, Because what happens is that's what adolescence is all about. It's about breaking through your myths and dealing with the world as it is. But the problem is that the adolescent looks back at the myth and scorns it. I don't need that mythological, Santa, and they get angry when they discover that Santa Claus is mommy and daddy putting the quarter to the pillow, because that's called a broken myth. What happens when you break the myth? It hurts, because you've just shattered one of the organizing principles of my world, right? What happens when you break the myth, right? So, I mean, we can spend a lot of time on broken myths, but you understand the idea, right? Now, what happens as you grow up, you get a little older, and maybe you become the parent, and you're about to put the quarter under the kid's pillow, and you realize that the tooth fairy does exist. Only the tooth fairy is not some sparkly, Tinkerbelly creature. The tooth fairy is a pattern of relationships in the world that makes the world gentle, that gives the world a sense of why I live, that allows a child to believe that every moment of growing up is spectacular and wonderful. And while I might not believe in a literal tooth fairy anymore, I can believe in that part of the world. And I can't prove that. I could give you a very cynical view of the world, which is probably more realistic and probably might protect the child more. But you know what? I don't want it. I want to share with my child the wonder of growing up. And so I'm going to re-embrace the tooth fairy, not as a literal thing, but as a myth, as a pattern of relationships in the world that makes growing up something amazing. I was listening to a talk radio show on the way, a couple of months ago, and they were dealing with, how do you tell the kid that Santa Claus doesn't exist? And I so wanted to call in. But I thought it would be a little untoward for the rabbi to call in and explain. And I wanted to say, it sounds like Schulweis, but Santa Claus exists. He's inside of all of us, That's a Schulweisian move, Because I want the child to feel, first of all, I want the child to I want to re-embrace, and I want my child to hold the beautiful fantasy of this time of year. And I want the child to embrace and to hold the wonder of family and community and friendship and the gifts of being part of a circle of relationships. And that's what to me, that's what you want to know what Santa Claus means to the rabbi. That's what, and I don't want the kid to lose that. You see, so the re-mythologization, does that make sense? The reappropriation of mythology takes place when I recognize that I don't have to believe it literally to believe it. I can believe it as a thinking person, and then sometimes I can set aside my rationality and just get into it and enjoy it. I can just get into it and enjoy it because something, it really does, it's like playing the game. It's like entering a theater is another thing. What do we do in a theater? You give up, you forget for a moment that couple on the stage are just actors. You forget for the moment you're at the Mark Taper Forum in downtown LA, and all of a sudden you're in 14th century Verona, and that really is Romeo and Juliet. You forget where you are and you enter into the drama, and that's something we all do all the time. We enter into the drama partially because it speaks a deep human truth. What's the great truth of Romeo and Juliet? Without love, life is not worth living. And so you enter into that truth. And you forget where you are, and the whole thing, you become part of the drama. That's what he's talking about when he talks about the reappropriation of myth. And that's what happens when moderns understand that, okay, science has broken all the literal truths, but that doesn't mean we get rid of these things, because frankly, they teach us something very important about who we are. They teach us something. Romeo and Juliet teach us something. the Torah teaches something very important about who we are and what we are. Go ahead.
Let me add to that. So,
Now you know the tooth fairy stories.
So we do this all the time. We mythologize ourselves all the time. Some of us believe that we are Bruins, and some of us believe that we are Trojans, and some of us believe that we are Bears. And some of us didn't go to any of those schools, and I can't understand it. But the truth is that for a couple of hours on a Saturday or on a Sunday, your life is somehow swept up with being a Bruin or being a Trojan. And at the end of the day, you're either won your battle or you've lost your battle. But you've had a great time regardless, and you can either brag or be embarrassed for the next year until they play each other again. The difference, though, he would say, is that when you're doing religion, when you're coming into a shul, those things actually can bear real consequences on your life. All the more so than going to a football game or a basketball game or even going to the theater, because it has to do with you, yourself, and your people. It has to do with your life and why you were created. Right? The questions of a basketball game or a football game is how well the patterns play out so that someone wins. The questions of religion is how will you live your life with the greatest amount of meaning in the short number of days you have on earth. It is the greatest theater, as Gilman would say, than any sports game or play or opera you could ever imagine. Because it's ultimately more dramatic. Because it has to do with the consequences of your life. Which opens the door for him to ritual in a powerful way that it didn't for any of the rationalists or even the Kaplanians or those groups. Because what it does is it allows for ritual to now bear the drama of the moment. Rabbi Gilman loved to do duchening. He was a Kohen. Right? That's where a Kohen puts a towel over his head and blesses the community. Right? You ask him on Monday through Friday morning whether that had any real bearing on anyone's life. And he's like, I don't know. I can tell you about where the process comes from, what it's due, where the shin and the hands and Spock and all of that. But on Saturday, at Musaf, he can say, I'm blessing the people because God is embodying God's Spirit through me and coming out and letting me bless the rest of my community. Monday through Friday, we open the Chumash, we open the Tanakh, we open the Bible, we open the works of the rabbis, and we see it as black ink on white parchment. And on Saturday morning and Saturday afternoon, it becomes black fire on white fire. And you can live in both worlds, which is what made him sort of the cusp of postmodernism. You can live in both worlds in this tension without having to reconcile Monday through Friday and Saturday and Sunday. Because that's what it means to live a full human experience.
Got it? You got it? So this was our friend. And this was a very serious Jew. A person who really took very seriously what we believe, what we hold, what we teach. Because he wanted very much to be able to say, I believe this with all my heart and soul and might. It wasn't enough for him to do what most of us usually do, which is to say, I'm not sure what I believe, or I believe it, but I don't believe it, or I do it even though I don't believe it. He had this profound, as many philosophers, as Rabbi Showeiss did too, this profound sense of intellectual integrity. And he wanted very much to try to find a doorway into an experience of the tradition, even though we live in a very different world, and we see the world very differently than the rabbis and teachers of that tradition. And this is the way that he offered it to his students. But most of all, as Rabbi Farkas began at the very beginning, it would always be very personal with him. It was I didn't like your paper. He would never say to you, I didn't like what you wrote. He would always say, meet me for lunch. It was always, I want to know you before I want to know what you wrote. I want to know why you wrote what you wrote. I want to know from where in your own experience that comes, because belief is deeply personal. And theology is communal. It's about us and what we share with each other. All right, Douglas, yeah.
How's he getting that meaning when you're turbo davening, going so fast that you can't even pay attention to what you're saying?
Yeah, that's
well, he didn't grow up with Yossi, so. But,
at your own pace.
no, for him though, look, Here's how I would phrase it, okay? What you call turbo davening, he would call it turbo image making. So what does that mean? Every prayer embodies God in a particular image. It's like a PowerPoint presentation on God in history. So you look at the Yotzer Or prayer, it's about God creating the world. You look at the Ahava Rabbah prayer, it's about God's love for the world given through Torah. You look at the Ga'al Yisrael prayer, it's about God redeeming Israel. You look at images of God. He said, the way that you think about God, as opposed to like the Zen Buddhists who say you have to empty yourself out, you have to like suck everything out, so that all that's left is this quiet, still nothingness. He says the way you think about God is actually the opposite. You shove as many images as possible, as quickly as possible, into your mind, so that the only thing you can concentrate on, the only thing you can think on is this fugue from one image to another image to another image. So he would say turbo davening actually, as you would say, if you understood what you were saying, and it pushes all the mundacity out of your brain, and all that's left are images of God. That's what he would say.
I'd give you a slightly different way of thinking about it. There's a new Star Wars movie coming out. Did you know that, by the way? It's important that you know that. I remember seeing the last one. Was it the last one or the one before that?
The one with the lightsabers or without the lightsabers?
The first one of the last trilogy. Anyway, you step into the theater, the film begins, it takes you to a very different place. Spaceships and lightsabers and stormtroopers, you know what I'm talking about? And right away, you understand what's going on, right? Now, anyone ever been to a movie and about a third of the way, a half of the way into the movie, you say, I have no idea what is going on here. You know, like one of these French modern movies. You ever one of these? When I was in college, I had to sit through these, and every now and again, Nina takes me to one of these movies because she's serious, and I like funny movies, and she likes emotional movies. And halfway, a third of the way, it's like I have no idea who these people are, what they're thinking, what's going on. I have no idea what this movie is about. What's the difference between those two experiences? What's the difference between I walked in, and from the very first scene, even though it is a very different world, I know exactly what's going on here, versus I'm sitting through a movie and I can't figure out, like, wait a minute, who's that guy, and why is that guy with that woman, and why is it all red all of a sudden? And what you ever have that? Because what's going on there is, in one case, you have a cinematic language that you speak. And because you speak it, those images can hit you very quickly. And you process them, you absorb them, you enter into the experience. And in the other, you have a cinematic language that you don't speak, or I don't speak. And I have no idea what is going on because I can't penetrate this cinematic language. I'll give you another example because I like to confess all of my limitations. So we went once to a museum, very famous museum of modern art, which is not my world at all, zero. And I sat there, I actually got angry at a certain point because I said to the docent who was there, I said, why is this art? I mean, what makes this art? If the janitor had left a bucket and a mop, you people would stare at it and say, oh, it's so deep. I mean, what is it, just because someone said it's art? Does it have any objective arts? And this woman looked at me, and I realized I was shouting at her. And I stopped myself. I said, I'm sorry. I just get a little crazy. And she said, it's okay. That's sort of what the artist had in mind. Because I don't speak the idiom of art. I don't speak the idiom of that artist. So here's the thing. If you speak the liturgical, that's the fancy word for prayer, language of the prayer book, entering into the quick davening is much like watching the scenes of a movie that you love, but it doesn't matter how fast it comes at you, you're into it, you're in it. You're in it, you're inside of it. If you don't speak the language, it will always be outside of you. It will always be outside of you. And it doesn't matter how slowly someone does it. In fact, you can even have someone explain it to you. And you'll say, okay, now I see what they're trying to do, but I'm still not in it. In the same way that I am when I'm absorbed into a scene of a film. You see the difference?
Just tell Nina not to wake you during those movies.
No, that's not. That's different. That's a different kind of a movie. But it's that exactly is the issue. It's not the issue that it's really a question of whether you can enter into the art form. That really is the issue. Yes, please.
On a different plane, how do you reconcile a Jewish organization disrespecting somebody of the stature and accomplishments of Rabbi Hillman by denying him tenure?
That's a lovely. Thank you for the question. So it's a lovely question. It was very, very painful for him at the time.
What's the question?
The question was, how do you respect an organization that denied a guy like this tenure? And I can tell you that that was only one of many sins that the seminary committed. So, I mean, it wasn't my favorite organization for a long time, okay? On the other hand, I got to tell you something really strange. It turned out to be the best thing they could have done for him. Because had they given him tenure, he would have written a lot of really arcane technical manuscripts about 20th century, 19th century philosophers. And he never would have turned inward to himself and asked himself, what do I believe? And he never would have turned to his students and asked us, what do you believe? That's why I started with that Torah piece. Va'anochi lo yadati. That moment, which for him was a terribly depressing moment, turned out to be his moment of self-revelation. Because he said, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life writing papers that only other professors are going to read. I want to know what I believe. I want to know what you believe. I want to talk to you about what it means to believe. What does believing mean for a 20th century or 21st century Jew? It turned out to be one of the most important turning points in his whole career and his whole life. And while he always wanted to get some sort of academic recognition, in the end, he never got the academic recognition, but there are going to be 1,000 people at his service on Sunday because he became the most influential teacher at the seminary. Because well, here you have two of us, right? We come from very different generations. For whole generations of seminary students, of young rabbis and teachers and thinkers growing up, he was the doorway because he stopped and said, what do you believe? You see, it turned out to be the most self-revelatory moment that could possibly have happened. Right.
So Jewish institutions should be bad things.
You don't have to encourage Jewish institutions to do bad things. Jewish institutions manage to do bad things all on their own. I don't, no, we can spend some time, another day we could spend some time talking about the institution. But in this case, for the man himself, what was once a tragedy turned out to be the most powerful turning point in his life. Okay, yes, please.
So an observation and a question.
Yeah, please.
It seems to me that, excuse me, what you're saying is that he believed like Jung in archetypes, he believed like Joseph Campbell in myths. I'm getting it? Yes.
Somewhere, yeah,
Okay.
pretty good. Yeah, he liked those guys.
So, excuse me, but in a post-Holocaust world, what is the now meaning that we get about God and pick any Holocaust you want? That's
Right.
always my question.
All right, so the question is, given Professor Gilman's points of view, so how does he answer the great questions of post-Holocaust Judaism, please?
Because I haven't read it.
No, we didn't expect you
I
to.
can definitely give you articles that he wrote about it, so if you want to read it, you can start there. That is the question. I mean, it's why he started with Job with me, because I was like, for him, all of theology in a post-Holocaust world is actually theodicy, justifying God's myth or existence or justice in the face of suffering and evil. That's what theodicy means, right? So for him, that's the number one question. That's the question that really ate him up his whole adult life. So his answer is similar to Maimonides in the sense that he understood that God, if God is this pattern, God is this sort of the pattern that completes our understanding of the universe, God is poetry, right? That one of the costs of living in a finite world is that finite things happen to each other. I'm sort of channeling Gilman through Maimonides now. So when it comes to getting sick, that's because your body, things bump into each other in all different kinds of ways. Right? Cells, amino acids, they create cancers, they create all sorts of diseases when viruses bump into cells, all sorts of things. It also means that the cost is that when human beings bump into each other, it could either be for extreme pleasure and love, or it could be for malice and death. And that the Holocaust wasn't God's fault, and it wasn't even God's fault that God didn't show up to miraculously save the people. Let's demythologize that. Right? He would actually be closer to Schulweis on this, is that it's our responsibility, not God's responsibility to save the world, so to speak.
So why should I come to shul then and say those prayers that I don't understand, blessing God and saying God is the most powerful, the most wonderful, and you're the judge, and I trust you. Why should I trust him?
Because, again, this is now Gilman speaking, right? Because when you re-enter into the ritual, right? So let's just be very clear. After the Holocaust, most Jewish theologians, including Itz Greenberg, who we will study with in a few weeks, begins with this place of radical demythologization. Let's take all the previous pre-Holocaust myths out, and then let's see what's left after the destruction, to see what's worthy of our time and our attention. For Greenberg, as we'll see, it's about re-acknowledging the initial God image of the world, which is the creation of human beings in the divine image, and that the responsibility, what happened is we had forgotten that as a humanity, and that in post-Holocaust we have to reaffirm that. And that is the response to the Holocaust, right? Schulweis would say that after the Holocaust, what we need to look upon is not the evil of the Nazis, but the goodness of human beings who were saving Jews. And that God exists not in the Tofets of Auschwitz, but in the human beings that saved Jews, hid Jews, right? The righteousness, that God still existed, we just have to find. And Gilman would agree with all of that by saying all of those are images, metaphors, for how we understand the universe. And now it's time in a post-Holocaust world to take the images that work for us and elevate those. And so when you come into synagogue, it's still okay to have an image of God that is the creator of the world, and a God that is of infinite love, and a God that is ultimately the source of redemption for the world. Because those images, those poetic images, are what embody us and value us, inure us, give us strength, give us power to go back into the world and to be the character that we're supposed to be. He suffered innumerably because of the Holocaust. Relatives who were perished, family members, his in-laws, his daughter's families, most of them were perished in the Holocaust. And these are a major question. And in the end of days, at the end of his life, he acknowledged that it's going to be a privation, a limiting factor, a boundary, upon which we will rub up against over and over and over again. But he wasn't willing to give up. He wasn't willing to give up the story, give up the myth, because it bears truth. It bears truth not in a scientific way, but in a poetic, meaningful way.
Moral way.
A moral way.
A moral way, right.
So he once shared with me, and then we can end,
yeah.
is one of his favorite lines in all of liturgy, in all of prayers, was the last stanza of the Adon Olam. It gave him energy and hope for the future. In fact, his book, Death of Death, begins with a small meditation on this last line. The line, you know it because we sing it on Shabbos every morning, but we kind of throw it away. V'ya ado avkid ruchi v'etisha v'yayira v'im ruchi geviati adonai li v'lo ira. Right? That at the moment that you lay down to rest, the moment of your death, right? If you live in the myth, if you're willing to re-mythologize it, you will die without fear. Because you have hope. And you have endurance of spirit. And that's how he lived his life.
That's what he was looking for.
Right.
I want to thank you for letting us remember our teacher. There is a beautiful tradition that when you lose a teacher, it's much like, in fact, the tradition says it's even greater than losing a parent. So if you will allow Rabbi Farkas and I to recite this prayer, if everyone will stand up. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabba, v'yamad yivrach yurtei, v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon v'yomechon, chayetechol Beit Yisrael, b'agalau v'zman kari v'yimru amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevarach le'olam olmeo. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudsha brichu le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran be'alma v'yimru amen al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Talmideon v'al kol Talmidei Talmideon v'al kol man diaskin diaraisa ki bi'atra adain v'ki b'chalata v'atar Yehei lahon lachon shlama rabba china v'chista v'rachamim v'chayim marichim v'zona ravicha v'rchana min chadam v'shamaya v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shamaya v'chayim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav v'yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Zecher tzadik livracha. Thank you all very, very much. Shabbat shalom. See you next week.